You find yourself on a balcony at dusk, city lights blinking like other people's achievements. You scroll through feeds, each image a quietly edited proof that life is happening faster for someone else: promotions, new houses, vacations, and places your passport only remembers. You measure success the way you learn to: numbers in a bank app, titles on an email signature, the gloss of lifestyle photos. Every mismatch is a small stone in your pocket, weighing you down. You tell yourself you're capable, that you work hard, and yet there is this undercurrent, a voice that speaks in comparisons and quiet accusations. Why not you? It murmurs. Why not now? At the office, the fluorescent lights hum while a coworker is celebrated for a deal you thought should have been yours. At the dinner table, friends clink glasses to milestones you postponed. A voicemail plays, another recruiter, another opportunity that feels like a late train. In the mirror, your face looks familiar and impatient, lines of effort meet eyes that have learned to tally other people's wins. You know the facts: steady work, prudent choices, sacrifices made in silence. But the narrative you carry is louder than the evidence. Envy is not loud at first, it's a slow, steady erosion. It reshapes your goals to match someone else's highlight reel and then questions your worth when the metrics don't align. You speak to a friend and force a laugh. "I'm fine," you say, but your fingers linger on the rim of the cup. "I just thought I'd be further along by now." The friend's silence is kind, but their words, "You're doing more than you know," land like a small, strange seed that doesn't quite take root yet. In the back of your mind, faith flickers, a distant chapel bell in the noise of your day, reminding you that life has seasons, not stopwatches. Still, the instinct is to hurry, chase benchmarks, compare paychecks, mimic the steps of those climbing higher. If this tension sounds familiar, you're not alone. In the next moments we'll look beyond the scoreboard and listen for a different kind of direction, a softer, steadier message that shifts timing into a companion, not an enemy. If this resonates, give this a heartfelt like, and subscribe with the bell so you don't miss what comes next. You watch him scroll again, thumb skimming a curated life. Promotion smiles, new kitchen light, a vacation photo with the caption that brags without saying a thing. The apartment is dim but the phone glow is bright, and every image presses like a small, precise weight behind your sternum. In the morning you tie your tie slower than you used to. At work you count other people's raises the way you used to count coffee breaks. If only, you tell yourself, and the sentence becomes a litany that tightens your shoulders and shortens your patience. So you run faster. You sign papers with hands that tremble because the numbers look like salvation. You say yes to opportunities that sound like the headlines you envy rather than the work your hands were meant for. Late nights blur with urgent emails and the hollow click of another purchase made to look successful. A loan that promised acceleration becomes a secret that wakes you at 2 a.m. You gambled on speed because speed is what the world applauds, and the applause is louder on other people's stages. Then, as if the world itself were tender, a different cadence finds you. A neighbor waters her small patch of daisies at dawn and looks up as you pass. "Things grow when you give them time," she says, as simple as a weather report. At a quiet coffee shop, an old mentor stirs his cup and remarks, "God doesn't rush the seasons, He manages them." The words aren't dramatic. They land like rain. A forgotten Bible verse slips from a page and catches your eye. There is a season for everything. You begin to notice small markers, an unpaid invoice that arrives late but with a lesson, a child's laughter that reorients priorities, a brief silence on a Sunday morning that feels like permission to breathe. You start to test new movements. Instead of chasing the flash sale of prestige, you open a ledger not to compare but to steward. You make a list of what you already own that can be cultivated: skill, time, relationships, simple resources no algorithm can curate. You tell a friend, "I'm trying patience," and he smiles like he knew patience personally. The gnawing eases not because the world has changed but because you have found a different map. If this resonates, if you feel that tug between hurry and hush, stay with what comes next. There are concrete steps ahead, clear practices that will help shift comparison into careful stewardship. If these words landed with you, like this moment and subscribe, ring the bell and come back for the next steady step. You sit in your car before dawn, the city still breathing in low lights, and you realize how loud the comparisons have been, an internal radio tuned to everyone else's highlight reel. That morning, a message arrives not as a thunderclap but as a single, steady exhale. A neighbor you barely noticed, an older man who tends the community garden, opens the trunk of his truck and invites you over with a nod. He doesn't offer advice like a lecture, he shows you his hands, dirt under the nails, and a row of seedlings just breaking through the soil. Everything has a season, he says, voice low, casual like wind. Rushing a seed won't make it sprout faster. What you can do is tend it. You listen. The city's urgency presses at the windows, but here, in that little plot bordered by cracked concrete, time moves differently. He tells a simple story about a year when he tried to force a harvest, watering too much, shifting the plants, impatiently pulling at roots, and how the crop never gave back what he demanded. Then he tells of the next year, measured care, observation, pruning only when needed. The reward wasn't sudden wealth, it was abundance that lasted. Later, at a quiet coffee shop, a former colleague, now a small nonprofit founder, shares a different kind of counsel. I stopped chasing titles, she admits, stirring her drink. I started stewarding what I had, a skill, a client, a savings cushion. I aligned my work to a rhythm, not a race. Doors opened that matched who I was, not who I was pretending to be. There's compassion in her eyes, no triumphalism, only an invitation to see prosperity as a relationship with time and resource, not a scoreboard. Back home, you sit in stillness long enough to hear your own pulse. A short prayer comes without ceremony, teach me the seasons. The answer isn't a plan delivered whole, it's a pattern, small disciplined choices, generous margins, waiting when the soul calls for patience. Each sign, each gentle word, rewrites the narrative that speed equals success. If this moment resonates with you, stay, what follows will show how to turn those small practices into financial pathways that honor calling and season. If you feel the stir, like this message and subscribe. The next scene begins the work of stewardship, step by deliberate step. The office hummed like a hive, fluorescent lights, the steady tick of a clock, emails piling like unopened bills. He sat with his shoulders taut, staring at a spreadsheet that promised growth if only he would push harder, take the next risky step. If I don't move now, he muttered to himself, someone else will take what's mine. His thumb hovered over a transfer button, numbers blurred into a distant shore he couldn't reach. Outside the window, a rain-slick street reflected a billboard of a smiling CEO, another life lived faster, louder. That night he wandered without plan, the city swallowing his frustration. In a small park, an old man fed pigeons beneath a lamp that smelled faintly of rain and bread. The man looked up and said, "You look like a man who measures time by other people's clocks." The sentence landed like a pebble in water. "What do you know of my time?" he snapped. The old man only smiled. "That it's different from theirs. God keeps seasons, not stopwatches. You can't harvest a spring in the middle of winter." The words didn't fix everything, but they opened a crack. Over the next days, little things arrived, an offhand remark from a colleague about patience, a song on the radio with a line about waiting, a sapling pushing through a crack in the sidewalk. Each felt like a gentle tap on the shoulder from something larger than his spreadsheet fears. He began to notice how, when he stopped chasing every headline, he had space to listen. He spent an afternoon in a quiet cafe with a mentor. "You are not behind," she said, stirring her tea slowly, "you're in a season. Steward what you have, guard your attention, budget like a gardener, plant where your hands and heart align." Dialogue changed into action. He canceled impulsive transfers, read a small book his mentor recommended, called an old friend for counsel. The restless urgency eased into intention. The city still raced, but his feet found a steadier rhythm. He felt God's presence not in a thunderclap but as a steady compass, pointing to timing and alignment over applause. If this quiet truth resonates with you, there's more ahead, practical steps and promises that will help you steward your gifts toward lasting prosperity. If you feel touched, like this message, subscribe and ring the bell so we can walk the next season together. You come out of the meeting feeling hollow, the fluorescent lights still humming in your ears, the numbers on someone else's slide replaying like a taunt. You walk without a plan until you find yourself on a quieter street where the city softens, trees crowd the sidewalk, a small community garden splits an empty lot, and a man with calloused hands is kneeling in the dirt, planting bulbs as if the world will wait for their bloom. You stop without meaning to. He looks up and smiles, not with pity but with a steady patience that pulls at something raw inside you. Feeling rushed? He asks, his voice low and sure. You laugh, a brittle sound. Always, you say. I'm trying to catch up. He rubs soil between his fingers, presses it around a tiny shoot. You know, my father used to say God gardens in seasons, not schedules. He doesn't ask you to rush the spring. He asks you to water the seed. The simplicity of it lands like rain. For a moment you only watch, the slow, deliberate way he tends, the way he checks the sun, the way he listens when a sparrow lands nearby. The envy that had been a sharp, buzzing insect in your chest quiets, replaced by a different ache, a yearning to learn how to wait rightly. You remember the list of benchmarks you've been chasing, titles, paychecks, other people's highlight reels. Each one had been a measuring stick that never matched. The man hands you a small bulb, the skin of it papery and full of promise. Plant it where you can tend it, he says. Not where someone else tells you to. Time will do the rest. It feels like a blessing, not a lecture. You feel a warmth, as if God has leaned in to press a gentle truth against your ear. Timing matters more than speed, alignment more than applause. On the walk home the city sounds are familiar but rearranged. You pass a storefront where a poster reads simple stewardship workshops, no big promises, just steady learning. You stop, then keep walking, but the idea lodges in you like a seed. You imagine tending what you already have, skills neglected, relationships ignored, a small idea you shelved because it didn't look like overnight success. The pressure eases, the horizon changes shape from a finish line into a season. If this lands with you, if your chest loosens and hope seems possible, hold on. There is more to learn about how faith and planning weave together, and a moment ahead where you'll be asked to choose trust over the old, frantic checklist. If this moved you, give it a like, subscribe, and tap the bell. There's a next step waiting that will help you plant with intention. You sit on a bench outside a coffee shop as late afternoon light bends through the trees, watching people move with a confidence you don't yet own. A flyer flutters and catches against your shoe. The headline is a phrase you once heard in church: seasons, not schedules. You laugh at the coincidence, but the laugh is small and grateful. Inside the shop, a barista hums an old hymn, and the melody catches in your chest like a familiar promise. The world, for a moment, feels less like a racetrack and more like a landscape with weather you can learn to read. A woman at the next table, gray hair braided down her back, hands steady with a knitting project, glances up and says, "You look tired of running." You tell her it's the chase, salary comparisons, glossy feeds, the pressure to arrive anywhere fast. She folds her knitting and leans forward. When I was your age, I measured life by other people's lights. Then I learned to tend my own. Timing isn't about speed. It's about soil. Her voice is patient, the kind that has watched seasons change. The words land like rain. That night, you kneel at the bedside and whisper the question you've been carrying: God, am I late? No thunder answers, only a quiet memory of a verse, a line in a book, the echo of that barista's hymn: seasons, not schedules. It isn't a denial of desire but a reordering. You begin to notice small signs: a friend calling with an opportunity that aligns with your gifts, a neighbor offering to mentor you, a savings account that grows more steadily than sudden windfalls ever did. Each is a discreet, steady hand on your shoulder, not a trumpet blast. You try an experiment. Instead of chasing the highest paycheck, you steward what you already have: time, skill, relationships. You schedule deliberate learning, you say no to one flashy risk, and you water what's nearest. The envy that used to spike now softens into curiosity about your own soil. If this scene stirs something in you, give it a like, a quiet yes to choosing your season, and subscribe with the bell so you won't miss how this shift begins to open doors that match your calling. In the next moment, you'll face a choice that asks you to trust those signs and take a first, practical step toward prosperity that feels like your own. Dawn finds you at the kitchen table again, not staring at someone else's highlight reel but tracing a slow line across your own ledger. The house is quiet except for the soft hiss of the kettle and the small ritual you've adopted, 3 columns labeled give, grow, guard. Your fingers pause on the grow column, a return to a course you abandoned, a seed of an idea you'd been too ashamed to nurture when comparison told you it wasn't flashy enough. Outside, a neighbor's lawnmower buzzes like the world's impatience. Inside, you breathe and let the season speak. A phone call interrupts. It's Mara, an old mentor with a voice like steady rain. You remember what we learned about seasons, she says. Plant in the quiet months. Prune the restless wants. Water what aligns. There's no sermon, only the tact of someone who's watched storms pass and harvests come. You describe the fear that by waiting you're missing your chance. She laughs, kindly. God isn't late, He's teaching you how to steward. Your pace is part of the plan. Later, at a small cafe, you overhear 2 strangers arguing over a flashy purchase and the heavy payment plan that follows. You think of your Give Grow Guard columns and decline the ease of the instant. You choose a smaller, disciplined investment, a class that sharpens a gift, a modest emergency fund, a habit of tithing that steadies your heart. Each choice is quiet, almost invisible, but they compound like roots under soil. The anxiety that used to spike when you scrolled social feeds slowly cools into curiosity about your own next season. Weeks turn into months. A client returns, not with applause but with respect. A part-time project becomes reliable income aligned with something you love. You sleep easier. Peace isn't a trophy, it's a steady light on your kitchen table as you reconcile ambition with wisdom. You no longer sprint to someone else's finish line, you tend your plot. If this resonates, give it a like, not for validation, but as a quiet promise to yourself. Subscribe and ring the bell to walk the rest of the way together. Next, you'll see how those steady choices open doors that look nothing like overnight success but everything like calling fulfilled. He wakes before dawn, the apartment half-lit, coffee steaming beside a stack of unpaid invoices and a dozen bookmarked tabs of other people's achievements. For years his measure of worth has been external, a salary slip, a promotion email, the glossy highlight reel scrolling through his phone. Tonight, the comparison that once felt like fuel now tastes like ash. A memory surfaces, a quiet voice that first nudged him away from the race everyone else ran. He listens. Outside, rain taps a steady rhythm on the window, and the city that used to feel like a stadium now feels like a classroom. He recalls the mentor's words, not loud commandments but patient instructions. Timing is a season, not a deadline, alignment is a compass, not applause. When the morning light spreads across a yellow post-it on his laptop, steward, not sprint, it isn't a slogan. It is a lifeline. He breathes differently. The envy softens, replaced by a curious, careful attention to what he already has, a skill honed in long nights, relationships that sustain, a reputation for doing what he promises. A conversation unfolds at a small cafe with an older woman whose modest bakery never chased trends but fed a neighborhood for 20 years. She pours him a cup and says, almost shyly, I planted one recipe at a time. Her hands are flour-roughened, her eyes steady. He sees herself in that slow, deliberate cultivation, not a quick vault to someone else's skyline, but the daily tending that produces fruit in season. Back at his kitchen table he draws a different budget, not austerity to punish his past choices, but stewardship that invites growth, savings that respect timing, investments that match his values, generosity that tests his faith. Signs come, not as miracles of spectacle, but as small doors opening, a former colleague calling with a project that fits his skills, a client who appreciates the care in his work, a bank statement showing the first balance he didn't have to explain. Each is a quiet confirmation, God directing by seasons, not stopwatches, pointing to doors that synchronize with who he is becoming. The change is not dramatic overnight, it's threaded through steadier mornings, clearer priorities, and the courage to decline comparisons. If this shift resonates, stay with the next moment, practical choices will begin to shape real openings. If you feel the truth of seasons over speed, tap like to confirm it moves you, and subscribe with the bell so you won't miss the concrete steps we'll take together to steward your gifts and finances toward lasting prosperity. Morning light finds you at the kitchen table again, but something about the room has changed. The clutter of comparison has been swept to a corner, replaced by a quiet ledger and a single mug steaming beside an open Bible. You trace a pen across a page, not to mark how much you lack, but to name what you actually steward: gifts, time, relationships, a handful of dollars that, if tended, might grow. A memory rises of the last conversation with the older woman who runs the community garden. She folded her hands and said, "God doesn't rush the root. He seasons it." Her voice lands like a benediction. You remember replying, half ashamed, "But I'm late." She smiled, "Then start with the year you're in." Action replaces the old reflex. You call your financial advisor not to chase some headline investment, but to ask, what steady steps align with what I was made to do? You meet with a friend who runs a small business and watch how she says no to flashy contracts that would fracture her vision. The scene is cinematic: late afternoon, sunlight through blinds, 2 cups of coffee cooling as plans take shape, an emergency fund, a modest investment, a boundary that protects time for the creative work that actually matters. Each small decision is a prayer answered in the form of prudence. God's messages arrive not as fanfare but as trained instincts: an idea that won't leave you, a timely introduction at a church gathering, an unexpected client who needs precisely what you offer. Rather than envy, gratitude swells. You begin to see a pattern: speed without alignment costs more than patience with purpose. The gnawing quiets because you're no longer competing on someone else's scoreboard. You measure progress by consistency, by the daily act of stewardship. There's still vulnerability, fear peeks in at night. But now you speak back, "I will steward what I have." The statement becomes a steady drumbeat. As you close the ledger and stand, the camera lingers on your face, calmer, focused, ready for the doors that will open in a tempo that fits your calling. If this shift resonates, give this moment a like to honor your own turn toward trust, and subscribe with the bell so you don't miss how those doors begin to open in the next scene. You sit at the kitchen table while dawn paints the city in thin gold, a stack of statements like small mountains beside your mug. For years your eyes measured everyone else's skyline: titles, cars, highlight reels, and every new headline felt like a countdown against you. Today is different because the ache that used to be sharp has softened into a question that no longer demands an answer on someone else's timetable. You breathe, and the house is quiet enough to hear a different voice, not the roar of envy, but a still, steady whisper that has been guiding you all along. A week earlier, an old colleague, soft-spoken, steady hands, sat across from you and said, "God uses seasons, not stopwatches." It sounded like a proverb then. Now, as rain begins to patter on the window, it blooms into image and meaning. You remember the small signs: a neighbor returning a long-forgotten tool with a smile, a chance conversation at the farmer's market that turned into a freelance referral, a stray line in a sermon that landed like a seed. None of them were dramatic. Each one was a quiet appointment with time. You begin to act differently. Instead of sprinting toward someone else's finish line, you catalog your gifts with patient honesty. You call a client you had ducked, and your voice carries calm where panic once lived. "I can't promise overnight results," you tell them, "but I will steward this work well." The project grows: small wins, steady payments, each one a rung on a ladder built for your height. Money arrives in rhythms that match your values: a steady retainer, a thoughtful partnership, an unexpected bonus for work done with integrity. Prosperity starts to feel less like spectacle and more like a garden tended across seasons. Peace takes the place of envy. You see clearly where you were comparing. You mark those places with compassion and decisive reallocation of time and resources. This is not the end of the story but the turning toward a practice: cultivating patience, aligning action to calling, celebrating the modest, faithful steps. If this moment lands in you, there's a simple promise: in the next part, you'll learn 3 daily rhythms that protect your progress and accelerate aligned prosperity. If this touched you, press like in gratitude, subscribe and ring the bell so the next rhythm finds you when it's time. The evening light pools through the window and rests on a pile of unpaid bills and a notebook full of plans. You sit there, the day's small victories braided with old doubts, and you hear again the soft correction that shaped the last months, seasons, not speed. It's not a booming command but a presence that nudges like warm hands on your shoulders. In the quiet, you remember someone, an old mentor, a pastor, or simply the whisper of God, saying, "You were not created for other people's timelines." The line lands like a key in a lock and the chest of comparison clicks open, the pressure eases. Outside, the city moves in its habitual hurry, but inside the rhythm has changed. You begin to count differently, not by paychecks you don't yet have, but by nights you chose rest, mornings you invested in a craft, conversations where you steward truth and resources with courage. A small client calls with a steady project, not a viral contract, and you feel an unexpected gratitude that tastes like rain after a long drought. The doors that open are not pyrotechnic, they are measured, aligned, sustainable, doors built to your measure, not someone else's highlight reel. You talk to yourself in that gentle, honest way you wish you'd always spoken. I will steward what I have. I will plant where I'm planted. It's not resignation, it's strategy. You start making decisions based on lasting returns, time with family, disciplined saving, learning that compounds, rather than chasing applause. That shift brings something rarer than riches, peace. The envy that once sharpened every misstep softens, purpose becomes louder than comparison. If this moment found you, if it loosened the knot in your chest, promise yourself one thing: you will come back to practice. Here we'll keep sharing the small, faithful steps that build prosperity from the inside out. If this story touched you, tap like as an act of hope, subscribe to Walk the Seasons Together, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next conversation that helps your calling meet its timing.